And it's crazy how much like a tax sale fix and flip is way more likely to be a six-figure deal almost every time, even with the small deals. You know, these little properties we're into for like 42 grand after rehab, and you sell for 140. You know what I mean? Or another one will be into for about 30 grand, should sell for about 125. And so there's all these ones we're looking at right now. It's like, man, almost every one of these are six-figure profit deals.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So pretty interesting. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a very quick version of our 3 stages of due diligence. So if you guys are members, you know that we go through each one of these individually in a training. But what we want to do today is just give you those steps that we go through, talk about them quickly, and then as you're getting started, or if you're not aware of them, you can go back and view our different 3 stages of due diligence. This is how me and Shade, I mean, really, we created these ourselves based on trial and error. You know, when me and Shade first got started, I don't know if all of you know our story, but we started back in 1999. I was a brand new real estate agent. My broker invited me to attend an auction with him one morning. I had no clue it was a tax sale. And then me and Shade started trying to learn everything we could about it. But this was before really the internet. I mean, the internet was available, but there wasn't any information out there. The information that was available was very confusing. And so over the years, we've created a system on how we go through and make sure that we're purchasing the right properties.
Yeah, the 3 stages of due diligence are based on how we conduct research on properties. It's about the steps that we go through when we're trying to figure out if a property has the potential to work or not. And we break it up into stages so that we can separate different aspects of the work and different aspects of the time the time invested with each property. So in other words, before we spend a half hour, on a property doing research, we want to make sure that different aspects of the property are going to work as potential investments. But every time we're going to decide to invest more time or potentially money into the property or into research, we want to make sure that that's justified by the research or the due diligence we've already done. And so, yeah, stage one due diligence is what we call basic research. It's the steps we take properties through every time as we're glancing through a list. So when we start looking at a list of properties, there are 6 steps that we take the properties through very quickly. In fact, sometimes it's not even so much steps as you're just going through and checking for different things. So one of the first things we do is we make sure the property is still available. But once we know it's available on the tax sale list, then we're going to pull up the assessment records. We're going to pull up the GIS mapping. We're going to pull up Google Street Mapping, so we can try to get every image we can from the property, maybe even street images of the property. Once we know where it is, then we're going to check for the value of the property. We're going to see how that property is valued compared to the other properties around it and what is sold recently. And based on that information right there, we should be able to know how much the property is opening up for, what it's worth roughly, and kind of what the property is. We should have a rough idea at this point. By step 6, we should know whether the property has the potential to work as an investment or not.
Yeah, exactly. You know, with that step one, we check the list. Part of the reason we do that is because the list can change. And so even if we're downloading an old list, and let's say we downloaded a PDF list, well, it's good to check and see if the county has had any redemptions so we don't waste time going through these steps. When we get to those county records, we're looking for the type of property it is, the assessed value, any property details that are on it, getting a good idea of what it actually is, and if it's a property that we want to move on to the next step. Each one of these steps is really meant to help you save time. If it disqualifies, you're going to stop doing it and you're going to look at the next property. Shay talked a little bit about the GIS mapping. That's going to help us tell how big the property is. We're also going to use the layer features. Many times we can find floodplains, topographical information, even sales information right there within those county GIS maps. In fact, maybe Shade will agree with me or not, but I think that that's probably one of the biggest changes that has made land investing easier than it was when we first got started. Because when we first got started, we were just using plat maps, which is kind of a black and white, a map that doesn't have any real detail.
Yeah, the GIS maps have been wonderful, at least in terms of a simple way for us to see where a property is located at, where the property boundaries are, to make sure it's accessible by public road, to make sure that we essentially know what is being advertised and offered. The GIS maps make it a lot easier, and really all of online records. I mean, the records are now usually attached to properties, and so it's easy for us to pull up assessment records on properties and to pull up all this data through the mapping that can help us confirm whether a property has potential or not to work as an investment. Now, that's all based on kind of surface level stuff, but it's the stuff that's going to matter, and so once we get through step 6, which is to check for risks and other holding costs. So, is there anything that looks like a potential risk with the property, and how much is it going to cost us to hang on to the property here for, let's say, a year? Once we know what those things, then we can start to look into things with the property that may not be on the surface. Because, I mean, by service level, stage 1 due diligence should pretty well help us weed out the properties that don't really have potential or don't have great value. But when we get into stage 2 due diligence, our focus changes slightly. Now we're not so much worried about trying to figure out if the property has potential to work as an investment. We know that it does. Now what we're trying to do in stage 2 due diligence is we're trying to make sure that there aren't other liens attached to the property that we may be unaware of, or money that could be owed on the property that we're unaware of. And so the way we're going to do that is through title research, or a title search is kind of what we call it here. But there's options for that. There are obviously professional title searches that you can have performed, but you can also do something we call an investor title search, where you essentially mimic or go through some of the same steps that somebody would if they were performing a professional title search. You're just basically doing it for different reasons, and you're paying attention to some of the different information. So primarily, we'd be paying attention to who the owner of the property is, and when and how they bought the property. Because that's going to tell us whether or not, there could be liens against the property here during their ownership, or whether we need to worry about liens being possibly existing before their ownership. All those things we can answer by looking into the owner of the property and how they bought it. So that's what stage 2 due diligence is all about. It's all about looking into things that may be attached to the property through the owners.
Yeah, absolutely. One quick point to make about stage 1 due diligence is we're also going to do a quick check of value. We're going to check Zillow, we're going to check Redfin, we're going to check the county assessment record, because really what we're doing is we're doing an online evaluation in stage 1. Like Shay talked about, once it's past that online stage 1, that's where we're going to get into stage 2 and find out more about the title. And so in stage 1, we went and we looked at the assessor records. In stage 2, we're actually going to go back to those assessor records as well, but we're going to be looking for different information. We're going to be looking for the ownership information. We're going to be looking for the deed information, because this is the information that we're going to use to actually go through the next steps in this process.
Yeah, well, there are a couple things that we need to know is, first of all, if there's any kind of a lien issued against a property, it's never issued against the property itself, it's issued against the property owner. And so whenever we find liens, they're always going to be attached to property owners' names, but then there might be details about the property included in the lien. So that's why we look at the owners, the recent owners of the property here, and how they acquired the property. If we look into a property assessment, we can see that this property is owned by so-and-so. We can see that this person bought this property, let's say 5 years ago. And when they bought the property 5 years ago, they bought it using a warranty deed. Well, that's important for us to know. It basically tells us that when so-and-so bought this property 5 years ago, at the time of purchase, it was free and clear of any kinds of liens or encumbrances. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had that warranty deed placed on it at the time. But that acts as a backstop for us in the research that we need to do, because we know the property didn't have any liens 5 years ago. And so we know that we're looking for any liens that may exist against the property from that 5-point-year period and moving forward in time. So basically, are there any liens, or could there be any liens placed against the property during this person's ownership or tenure of the property? And when we see that, we basically know the names that we need to search for, under that owner's name, to look for anything that may be attached to the property. We also know some of the property details, like its assessment number, its parcel number, is more likely what it would use, and any other details there to help us identify the property inside those records for something like a lien. So when we do see liens, if we find a lien under that name that we're searching, we can pull it up and see if the lien has any details on there that match up it to this property. Because there can be liens out there that exist against the property owner, but if it's not attached to the property itself, or if it's not, if the property information isn't listed in the lien, then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we find that ownership information, we're going to locate the deed. Now, the nice thing is most of the time, the deed is going to be directly connected to the assessor records. If not, we're going to go ahead and look for the clerk or the recorder's office. In fact, we're going to look for them either way, because that's how we're actually going to research and do a lien search on the property. So as we start looking at the deed, we're going to look, what type of deed is it? Is it a warranty deed? Now, if it's a warranty deed, like Shade said, we can go ahead and just research that one owner's name, because we know when that owner bought it, it had a warranty deed. There wasn't any issues before it. Now, if it was a tax deed, a quitclaim deed, a certificate of title, anything other than that, then we'd need to go through and start doing what we call establishing the chain of title.
Yeah, and establishing the chain of title is really about going back to the last point that property had a warranty deed. You know, that is, and it's also checking any transfers that occurred in between then, and it's matching up names to make sure that the names are correct, and we don't see anything that seems off on it. We don't see a transfer that occurred there that doesn't seem to be mentioned or doesn't have the correct names here on it. That's generally what we're going to do to find liens against the property. We'll know by finding out how the property owner bought the property, how many names we need to search, and then also how many liens we can find underneath those name searches. So liens are actually relatively easy to find for us, at least on most properties. Occasionally there are properties that are tricky, but most of the time we can find liens against properties. So if we get through stage 1 and stage 2 due diligence, we've basically done our initial evaluation of the property, kind of done the basic research to see what the numbers are. We've gone through and done some research on the deed to the property and the history of the property to know whether there's any liens placed against it. But up to this point, we haven't done anything in terms of any kind of an on-site evaluation yet. We usually wait until the very end to try to do that, because properties redeem all the time. And we are, if we go and send somebody by to take pictures of property 2 weeks ahead of time, it's not uncommon for that property to redeem last minute, and for that, the money we paid to go out and get pictures taken, for that to be wasted. So we try to wait until the stage 3 or until the close to the auction date where we start this part in the process, where we start stage 3, which is, this is a final review that we do to determine the condition, the value of the property, and what our maximum bid is going to be. And what stage 3, the first part of what stage 3 is about, is it's about performing an on-site evaluation. We did an online evaluation in stage 1 due diligence, when we kind of figured out what the property is. But if there's any kind of improvements that are involved, like let's say we're dealing with a home, well, we can do an online evaluation, but it's not necessarily telling us what the condition of the property is. It's not necessarily telling us about things we may need to look out for. For instance, the property could have burned down 2 weeks ago, and we wouldn't know about that unless we went and drove by the property or sent somebody to go and drive past the property. And that's what this is all about, is getting images of the property so that we can try to accurately determine what the condition of the property is, and then try to set a solid number for the value. We need to know what the condition of the property is in order to kind of set an accurate number on what we think the value of the property is.
Yeah, in fact, all of these different steps, me and Shade really had to kind of figure out on our own. I remember the first auction that we participated in. In fact, we didn't even have money to bid on a lot of the properties we were researching. We were just trying to learn how to do it. We had some money that if we could, win some of this land, we were going to try to do that. In fact, we ended up did winning one piece of land. But we started a month and a half before the auction was even taking place. And we put, hours and hours and hours, and even drove past properties 2 to 3 weeks before the auction. And a bunch of those properties ended up redeeming. So we wasted all of this time. And so when we're doing that on-site evaluation, we're going to wait until as close to the auction day as possible before we actually are going to go out there and get current photos. But if you're buying a structured property, a home, a commercial property, anything like that, you need to do an on-site evaluation. That is the quickest way you can lose money. It's interesting, and Shay can even talk about this even better than me, because he's attended quite a few auctions last year and this year, where we've drove past a property and we've seen that this property has a tree fallen on top of it, or all of the windows are busted out and the front door is open. And, and if you were to look back even 6 months or a year ago on the online information, hey, it looked great. So even local people at some of these big auctions, not usually your small ones, because those usually be more investors, but some big auction where it was advertised within the community, you'll have people that have never drove past the property yet are bidding based on that online information.
Yeah, we've seen people probably we've seen more people lose money that way by assuming that online information was current and accurate. We've probably seen more people lose money that way than any other way. But we basically, if we can't go by there ourselves, we're going to send somebody out there to get photos of the property. So this is usually one of the last things that we do in our auction preparation, is sending somebody out to get images of all the properties that we're interested in. Once we have the images, though, we can do a full comparative market analysis on the property. In other words, in stage one, we kind of check the value, but it's a very quick preliminary check of value. It's probably within 10% or so, maybe 20%, but it's not going to be exact. For this stage, in stage three, we want that number to be more exact. We want to know exactly what we think the value is based on what these other properties around it have sold for. And once we know what that value is, then we can work on setting our maximum bid. And the maximum bid is always going to be based on a percentage of value. So if we believe the property is worth $100,000, we're going to set our maximum bid as percentage of value. If it's something like a home, well, we're probably not going to bid too much higher than about 35%, maybe 40% if the property's in great shape. It's pretty rare for us to pay more than 40% for something like a single family home, unless there are specific reasons why we believe there's going to be much less work needed on the property. So if it was newer, let's say a property built in 2006, well, that could justify paying a little bit more for it because we believe it's going to have less work than a property, let's say, that was built in 1946. So we can get an idea of exactly what the condition is, we can get an idea of what the value is, and then we're going to set our maximum bid there as a percentage of value. And then we participate in the auction, basically setting that max bid and making sure we don't go above it. But for most of the properties, it's relatively simple here with our max bid once we participate in the auction. At least it makes auctions much easier to participate in and much less stressful. If you already know what your numbers are, you can stick to the numbers, and you've already done the research on the properties. It's really just a matter of placing your bids and waiting to see what happens.
Yeah, in fact, our members have access to our tax deed calculator software, where you can put in all of those details. You can put in, your different comparables. So you can find those comparables, put that information in the calculator. You can put a percentage of how much you'd like to bid, and it'll tell you how much that is going to be. You can go ahead and put in all of the different expenses, cleaning the title, cleaning up the property, rehab cost, changing the locks. You can put in all of those different fees. It'll break down what your profit margin, what your expected profit margin is based off of all of those different numbers. And so when we go into this, we don't go in blind. We have our max bid set, and very rarely will we go above our max bid. Maybe 1% or 2% if we were really conservative. But, we're willing to let properties go, then get into a bidding war and overpay, because there's always new inventory. The one thing that we try to discourage our students from doing is having a mindset, well, I've got to get something today, otherwise, it's not going to be worth it. There's always going to be a new deal tomorrow. And, you spending a little bit more time researching another auction, finding some more properties, is going to make you more money than making a bad decision today.